choice of wigs, but I just go with the au naturel style. I was on stage yesterday talking about refugee connectivity, and I mentioned briefly work that I'm doing with the United Nations as a smart city expert, so I'm going to elaborate a bit on the kind of work that I do. It's in fact a unit, a bilateral agreement between the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, the UNEC based in Geneva, which takes care of the greater European region, including Central Asia. There are 4 such groups in the world trying to coordinate pan-regional efforts. And YESE, the University of Barcelona, and they created this Center of Excellence. It's called pppcities.org. Please go there and check it out. And the point is accelerating the speed of adoption of success stories and models that have been proven to work. Now, we have done quite a lot of work in terms of defining the frameworks, organizing events, and sharing this information. And I'll get back to that a bit later on with a real case study of what we've done. We have talked a lot yesterday about amazing things, what's happening when you have the mentality of abundance and how quickly new technologies are going to be implemented, because there are lots of things being prepared right now that ready to go to mass consumption. Now, we've been talking a lot about the technology of the future and what's here already and is about to scale. I would like to discuss a little bit the technologies as where are they coming from. And that's important because if you know where you're coming from, it's a lot easier to understand where you're going. The example that I have here is the speed of adoption of new technologies. I mean, if you think about the start with the telegraph, now there are ancient ads and articles written about people having a telegraph in each home. I mean, you'll be there yourself communicating with your friends because everybody was going to be connected to a telegraph, and it's just this amazing thing. This did not happen, as we are fully aware. It was a B2B2C implementation, and it took an excruciatingly long amount of time to actually happen because it was so expensive to build that infrastructure. So if you are trying to cover a whole country, like the United States or continent, so with lots of interchanges in the case of Europe, you have to dig the ground. So you have to get this infrastructure there. First, it's very difficult, it's very expensive, and it's best done by governments as monopolies. And we all know that this does not end well if you stay as a monopoly when you're supposed to have competition to enhance the innovation levels. So what happened is basically they built the first infrastructure. In the case of the United States, it was with the AT&T that then was chopped into pieces and then started merging again. It was a very long process that gave us a link NYC. We have a gigabyte connection in New York, and you can download a movie in a couple of seconds anyway. But this took more than 100 years to get to that level. But the speed of change is accelerating. So you can see that at some point in time, that dream of having a telegraph in every home was slowly approaching in a very different format, with the Macintosh having that interface that made it feasible for people to interact with technology without having to learn how to do Morse code and do it fast to justify that communication method. And it evolved up to the web that allows us to access a wealth of information, all the way to the point of the iPhone, which is not even 10 years old. I mean, Eric was mentioning that. It's like 2006, World Cup final. There are no smartphones. You had a couple of very blocky devices that were prototypes for what iPhone eventually managed to deliver and continues to evolve. Now, once you have that tablet and access to all the world's information in a way that is easy to interact with, I think just using a finger, multiple fingers depending on the device, you can realize the dream of a telegraph in every home, and you can start doing wonderful things on the go, not only in the home, but you are the center of your world when you have that kind of connectivity. So the point here being, it's getting faster. And we do have the cost of deploying the new devices. I mean, Link NYC is a very expensive proposition, but in a place like New York, you pay it back very quickly because you're basically selling advertisement in a place where there are lots of people passing by. So you can justify that as a business model. Other places, refugee camps, for instance, probably not ideal, but it is a model that allows you to enhance the quality of the service being offered without spending a tremendous amount of money and effort. And what's happening here is that you have a window to all the information in the world, or most of it, and you're always with it. And what happens? What happens is that, for me, smart city is a PR tagline, because cities are already smart. We all smart individuals. We're doing things in the smartest possible way within the means that we have available. In this case, a smartphone and all the information in the world makes it a lot more interesting as a proposition. But if you're registering for the Smart City Expo in Barcelona just 2 weeks ago, this is what you get. I mean, which part of smart city are you interested in? I mean, you can't really read the detail. That's not the point that you read the information, just the sheer volume of topics that fall under smart cities. And it all depends on who you're talking with. I mean, making a Siberian oil city smart is very different from making a city in the jungle smart. I mean, they have different priorities. The citizens will have a very different definition of what is valuable to them. And cities will have to adapt accordingly, to try to use the technology that is available. They will try to minimize their expenses, and one very smart way of doing that is implementing technologies that will save you money, so you have a recurring budget that you're pretty much using in a more intelligent way, so there's money left for you to deploy the technology that makes it smarter, so the virtual circle is established, and they all have to be adapted. But the concept of smart city is just a benchmark saying, how can it be even smarter? And they're all going to be different. Now, if you use as an example of they're all different, but they all have shared common goals, I'll give you 2 ways, which are an extreme simplification of how cities can become smarter. One is top-down, the other one is bottom-up. We're very familiar with that kind of metaphor. The example that I use for the top-down approach is the region of Nice. In France, if you're familiar with the French way of thinking, they're extremely structured. Everything is centrally managed, and I have a French colleague here in front of me who seems to be agreeing with me. And there's someone in Paris saying, let's create the concept of a metropolis, which is basically getting lots of municipalities together so that they can do certain things in an economically feasible way that they could not do by themselves. And that's the case of Nice Métropole, which is a cluster of municipalities that someone in Paris said, okay, we're going to have this new concept. And it's actually quite interesting because this part here used to be Italian. So around 100 years ago, they're actually shooting at one another because they had some, mini war at that border. And right now, they're actually part of the same agglomeration with shared goals and deploying those technologies. Now, they had a budget, they had a plan, they had a team, and everything was structured, and they eventually created this operations center focusing on things that the citizens of that region considered to be valuable, and they deployed an IBM solution. IBM is very good at doing that. It's not advertising for them. I have no links to IBM, but they happen to be particularly popular with cities that are trying to establish this kind of operations. And it is a success. It is evolving. It's going to be deployed in other regions in France, and that's one way of doing it. You plan accordingly. You have the structure and the resources available to be able to deliver on your plan, and in the case of France, they're very good at doing that. Now, you have, as a summary, the focus that you need when you have the structure is that you can establish contracts that are very long term. And when you're working with large companies, it's really important to give them the solid ground and say, okay, we're signing a contract with you as a concession for 20 years. That allows you to do certain things, to use certain competences of those companies in a way that is reassuring to all involved. And that's what I call the top-down approach to get to a smart city, or to make a city smarter in this case. In this case, not even a city, it's a whole region. It's a metropolis with lots of municipalities. And Then we have another case, which is a place where I was born and grew up. Now, Rio is not famous for being a highly organized place, extremely structured. It's big and messy, and that's the way it was built and evolved, and we have to adapt to those circumstances when we're trying to create manners to make that region smarter. If you look at the case of Rio, it is a very, very large place. I mean, you have 12 million people in the greater area, which is not the municipality of Rio, but people who actually commute to go and work in Rio. And you can see the scale, I mean, this being 100 kilometers, and that scale makes it challenging by definition, especially in terms of transportation. And how can you make a city like Rio smarter when everything is short-term, last minute? What can you do to fix this problem and patch it here? That's very bottom-up, as in you're reacting, not planning 20 years ahead. But the curious thing is that even in a place like Rio, what happened is that in 2010, there were floods in the city and hundreds of people died. And we don't have many natural disasters in Brazil. We don't have earthquakes, quakes, hurricanes. We do have floods every now and then, and that was very shocking to the population. It's like, wow, hundreds of people have died because of nature. We're just not used to that. And there was this very strong reaction saying we have to do something to prevent this kind of incident because the city was paralyzed. When you have floods, no one can drive because the roads are blocked, and there was no communication possible. You had 3 teams offering the same service, trying to get to the same place without knowing that the other 2 were already on the way. And what they decided to do in this case, say, well, we have this thing called Olympic Games in 2016, and someone has a budget, so let's use this money to make Rio smarter. Very reactive, very bottom-up. And they ended up with the same solution. So you have an IBM operations center that is adapted to the circumstances of the city, which is a big, messy place. And I was there for the Olympic Games, and I was stunned. I was so impressed at how efficient things were running, and I'm from there. I mean, I'm kind of entitled to be extremely critical of my city, and I was really impressed with the results. So transportation was just incredible for a city of this size. You get across this 100 kilometers in 40 minutes, something that would take 3 or 4 hours before. So the reactivity and an implementation of a solution that was adapted to the circumstances did provide certain results, but it was reactive. Now, I'm not saying that one method is better than the other, because it would depend a lot on the culture of the country and the people you're dealing with, the definition of value and the problems you're trying to solve. But these seem to be the 2 methods. And it basically means that if you do nothing as the government, your city will become smarter. But it's going to be grassroots. It's just people with their smartphones figuring out ways to make their lives easier. And that's not necessarily the most efficient way of doing that. So the case of Nice, a very structured French centralist approach, would not work in Brazil. So trying would be a waste of time because you just get blocked along the way. And most cities would fall in between, as in you need to have some sort of structure, and you need to have a very good adaptation to the requirements of that specific place. So having these 2 approaches covered, I can go back to the story I was mentioning in the beginning, which is how can we adapt to the local circumstances in a way that works in the whole world? Now, United Nations, and you may or may not be aware of that, they issue very long-term goals every 15 years. So between 2000 and 2015, we had the Millennium Development Goals, which were very, very aggressive and very ambitious. And they were not only achieved, they were surpassed. I mean, most people say United Nations, just talking heads, diplomats in Geneva, New York, trying to figure out how to save the world. That actually worked. So it is important that people realize that a 15-year plan that is active at the global level, there's a consensus of 193 countries, was surpassed, and objectives were absolutely stunning. So between 2016 and 2030, we have the SDG, the Sustainable Development Goals, and they're even more aggressive. I mean, we're talking about ending poverty in the 14 years that I have left. And that structure is really important because the city of Riga, for instance, is talking about goals for 2030. And it gives you a theme. You have the 17 SDGs, and people discuss saying, okay, which SDG you're talking about, which one is the most important, which are the secondary ones. And you have that kind of conversation in a way that can be applied anywhere in the world and adapted to the local requirements. So our team, the group of experts, was invited by a city in Ukraine with 100,000 people called Alexandria. I lived in Kiev in 2007. I've been to Ukraine maybe 15 times. I had never heard about Alexandria. They are 4 hours from Kiev, train ride. They're about an hour and a half from a war zone, well, frozen conflict these days. And the mayor has been re-elected 3 times. So he's trying to leave a legacy. And he was pushing so hard for the city to become smart without really knowing how to do it. So he came to the United Nations, to this group specifically, PPP cities, and asked for help. We went there, like 3 experts, one from academia, one from a city in Spain, a neighborhood, a suburb of Barcelona, and I went there representing the private sector and consulting and the implementation view of things. And we did a workshop that lasted a day and a half. And 2 months later, they had already issued a plan, they had a team, they had a budget, and a couple of weeks after that, they had published a book on their plans all the way up to 2030. Now, you would think that a place pretty far away in a country that has a per capita income is about 1/10 of that of Portugal, which is one of the poorest Western European countries, you would think that they don't have a chance. There's nothing they can do really to improve that kind of situation. And you go to the Smart City Expo in Barcelona, and you see those rubbish bins with a sensor that tells you how full it is, and it sends an SMS to a central computer that then reroutes the trucks. And that's one way of doing it. But it's not necessarily the best way, because the city of Stockholm has another system, which is basically stickers. So they have plastic stickers they put in the rubbish bin with a QR code. And they're basically asking citizens, we're giving you a free app. And that's something else that Eric mentioned. You take a picture of that QR code when you believe that the rubbish bin is full, or you take a picture of a pothole with the GPS coordinates. So basically citizens are voting, saying, okay, this is something I care about. This rubbish bin being full annoys me, and that's why I'm spending my time to go there and vote for someone to take that as a priority. The pothole that seems to be the largest is not necessarily the most important, because there's a smaller one that is breaking shock absorbers, and people go there and say, okay, this is the one that needs to be fixed first. So the important element here is we have gone through several cycles of technology, so the infrastructure exists, it's just being improved. The marginal cost of deploying new services is going down to 0, so we have this mentality of abundance. We can create new software very quickly, and I say, okay, this is solving a real-life problem. And most of it is being done as open data, because cities are not competing with one another. I mean, the city of Stockholm is more than happy to give the software that allows people to create a similar app in relatively poor places like Alexandria in Ukraine. And that solves their problem without expensive technology. We're just empowering citizens and saying, okay, with this device that you're very familiar with and a sticker, we can solve a problem in terms of how many kilometers the trucks are doing and how efficiently they're doing the work. So this is important, because you're basically telling citizens that you want us to save money, you want us to be efficient, you need to participate. And all cities should learn from that, and that's what we're trying to achieve when we establishing frameworks and doing workshops and sharing those experiences. And it is something that will definitely help us achieve the SDG goals. And I invite you to learn more about this process and be as engaged as you can be, because this is about you in the end of the day. So thank you very much for your time, and enjoy the rest of the conference. Okay.